Good evening, I'm Susan Ormiston and this is The National. Police officers shot in the center of Paris just days before a crucial national vote. Nala Ayed has it all covered. Donald Trump fires a trade missile northward.
Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace.
And that was just for starters. Ontario takes aim at an overheated housing market.
We know we have a problem.
Will new measures hit the target? Plus, at issue on the politics of housing and trade. Peter's here for that. A country on the verge of a crucial vote is on edge tonight. A new deadly act of violence in the heart of Paris just as the French head to the polls this weekend. It happened here near the Arc de Triomphe on the famed Champs-Élysées. A lone gunman apparently targeted a group of police officers, killing one, wounding two others before he was shot dead. Extremists have claimed responsibility, a claim not yet proven, but one that will ensure a 16-month state of emergency remains in force. Nala Ayed has more from Paris.
From the usual bustle of the Champs-Élysées, suddenly came the unusual sound of gunshots. And then this warning.
Mesdames et messieurs, you have to stay back, please. The area is dangerous because of shotgun. Please stay back.
With the presidential election starting Sunday, authorities had warned something like this could happen. One man, witnesses say, came out of a car and just started shooting. Apparently, from the start, targeting police on duty inside a van.
Il a garé juste derrière le camion.
He parked just behind the van and he got out with a Kalashnikov. And I heard 6 gunshots, says this witness. I thought they were firecrackers.
La police en fait.
By the end of it, 1 police officer was killed, 2 others badly injured. The gunman was also shot dead, an extremist apparently known to police. His home was later raided.
Nous sommes convaincus que
We are sure that the leads which point us to this case, which should reveal the truth, are of a terrorist nature, says French President François Hollande. A claim of responsibility did come from a site affiliated with ISIS, much quicker than usual, but still impossible to confirm. France, still under a state of emergency since the 2015 Paris attacks, is also in the final hours of a fiercely contested election campaign. At least one of the candidates canceled events for the final day of campaigning ahead of Sunday's vote, and more than one was quick to comment.
C'est fini le laxisme.
Lenience is over. Naivete is over. We can't leave a weak country to our children, says far-right Front National leader Marine Le Pen. Just 2 days ago, police arrested 2 men with a horde of weapons and explosives in the final stages of planning a pre-election attack. The Interior Ministry says 50,000 police will be on the streets to secure polling stations throughout the election period. President Hollande promised, "We will be absolutely vigilant." Nala Ayed, CBC News, Paris.
And Nala will be back later with a closer look at Sunday's French election, the choices and why that vote is being watched so closely outside France. That's coming up in about 40 minutes. Well, so much for just needing to tweak NAFTA a bit with Canada. As Donald Trump faced increased pressure from the people who voted him in, his tone has also changed on Canada for the worse. Today, he declared Canada's treatment of American dairy farmers, quote, a disgrace. And then he added softwood lumber and energy to his rant. So will that change Canada's approach to dealing with the U.S. president? Should it? Here's Katie Simpson.
Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace.
And with that, Donald Trump fired another round of shots north of the border.
The fact is, NAFTA, whether it's Mexico or Canada, is a disaster for our country. Included in there is lumber, timber, and energy. So we're going to have to get to the negotiating table with Canada very, very quickly.
This is the second time Trump has targeted Canada in a week, On Tuesday, he blamed Canadian dairy regulations and tariffs for the financial downfall of American farmers. Canada's foreign minister declined to answer questions, but in a statement, Chrysler Freeland countered each of Trump's criticisms, saying dairy trade massively favors the U.S. by a ratio of 5-to-1. A continued lumber dispute will only drive up the cost of wood and homes for U.S. consumers, and she described Canada as a secure, reliable source of energy, providing the United States with 43% of its imported crude oil.
We're not going to overreact.
The Prime Minister defended NAFTA and Canada's dairy system in an interview with Bloomberg News done just before Trump's latest criticism. Justin Trudeau also offered insight into how he's dealing with the new president, describing him as a listener.
As he has shown that if he says one thing and then actually hears good counter-arguments or good reasons why he should shift his position, he will take a different position.
Trudeau has pushed Canada's position through a charm offensive, spending time with Trump's influential daughter while ministers regularly meet with their U.S. counterparts.
It hasn't worked so far, so I think that Mr. Trudeau's got to adopt a different attitude with regard to President Trump.
The opposition is calling for tough talk, but Trudeau's former foreign policy advisor has a different suggestion.
I think that it makes sense for Canada to be taking these comments seriously, prepare for every eventuality, continue the outreach, but there's no need to overreact to Mr. Trump's rhetoric on a day-to-day basis.
Along with the tone change, Trump is bringing new urgency to reopening NAFTA, saying he wants U.S. officials to report back with a strategy within 2 weeks. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
It's now been 10 months since the federal government legalized medically assisted deaths across the country. CBC News has learned that more than 1,300 Canadians have chosen that option since it was made available. Chris Brown brings us one couple's story.
And then we just came into our room.
In January, John McTavish's husband Rob chose a medically assisted death.
Rob got into bed. That's the quilt that I covered him up with. And then the doctors came in, and 5 minutes, it was over.
Rob Rowlands learned 2 years ago he had cancer.
He had no strength left. He would go to the floor, all kinds of just horrendous things.
Months of radiation, chemo, and surgeries left him unable to even eat.
There was really no quality of life. And on January 3rd of this year, he made the decision that he was done. So we contacted the doctor and set everything in motion that on the 6th of January, he would be able to end his life.
The end came with an IV and drugs prescribed by a doctor that flowed into his body. The physician also vouched that Rowland's death was reasonably foreseeable, as Canada's law requires. Since last June, at least 1,300 Canadians have chosen a medically assisted death. Vancouver Island has among the highest assisted death rates in Canada, with 100 deaths through the end of February, or roughly 2% of all the deaths on the island, suggesting a fairly rapid adoption rate, says Dr. Jonathan Regler.
I would say the law is working reasonably well.
Regler practices in Courtenay and has been personally involved in 10 such deaths. He believes even more people would opt for it if they weren't required by law to be aware and coherent at the time of their death.
I think that we should not insist that people have capacity right up until the very end. Apart from anything else, it's leading to patients having to forego painkillers whilst waiting for a medically assisted death, and that's wrong.
He typed this up on Thursday night.
McTavish says his husband wrote a letter just hours before he died.
And I could have never loved another as much as I have loved you.
It's a goodbye that increasingly many Canadians are choosing. Chris Brown, CBC News in Courtenay, BC.
An investigation is underway in BC after a deadly derailment involving a logging train. 2 members of a rail crew have been killed and 3 others badly injured. It happened in the tiny community of Was, west of Campbell River. The cause of the derailment is unknown. There were initial reports of workers being trapped under logs. 1 person remains in critical condition. Just west of Montreal, a town is telling its residents to leave their homes in Rigaud. A week of intense rain has left areas completely flooded and now under a state of emergency. The mayor is warning residents water levels are still rising. Flooded streets are also affecting neighborhoods in Laval and nearby areas. And these pictures are from Hamilton. Lots of waterlogged streets there as well after at least 25 millimeters of rain fell. Another 15 millimeters is expected overnight. Some houses were reportedly affected as well. British Columbia moved first last year. Now Ontario is stepping in to try to correct a housing market many say is out of control. There are 16 new measures, including a tax on buyers who don't live in Canada. But is that the biggest problem? Ron Charles explains.
Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne was clearly feeling the pressure of a high-octane, overheated housing market in the Toronto area. Pressured to do something, anything. In this case, that starts with a proposed 15% tax on single-family homes purchased by non-citizens who don't live in Canada.
With this tax, we're targeting people who aren't looking for a place to raise a family. They're looking only for a quick profit or a safe place to park their money.
The tax would cover an area called the Greater Golden Horseshoe, wrapping around the western end of Lake Ontario and slightly beyond, with a population of nearly 9 million people. That area has been experiencing double-digit yearly increases in home prices. But even the Prime Minister acknowledges there isn't enough information on how big a problem foreign buyers are.
The challenge that we're facing is one of, and we saw this more acutely a year ago in Vancouver, a dearth of data on exactly who's doing what and what's doing what.
To deal with that dearth of data, Ottawa boosted the budget of StatsCan so it could look at how much of the hot market is a result of foreign speculation. That's why some experts question the wisdom of bringing in foreign buyers' taxes before StatsCan's results are in.
If people are comfortable with making policy on speculation, gut feeling, then yes, it's coming from gut feeling school of economics, and good for you.
Still, he says it is clear that Vancouver's foreign buyers tax only slowed the market there, and he doesn't expect it to do much more than that in Toronto, if anything.
The rate of increase, the acceleration in prices has slowed down, if not stopped, which is very different from saying that prices are going to come down. So if you are a buyer hoping in Toronto that now with these measures prices will come down, it is going to be unlikely to be the case.
Other measures announced today would target certain types of property flippers and allow municipalities to impose special taxes on vacant homes. All of the proposals still need legislative approval. If passed, the 15% tax on purchases by non-residents would be retroactive to today. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
And it's not just owners affected by today's announcements. The measures tackle the rental crisis in the region. But as Howard Gould tells us, controlling rents and vague incentives to build may have an opposite effect.
Nicole Meredith is packing up and moving out. Her rent is soaring by more than 30%.
This is my apartment. It's 450 square feet.
Viewers of The National met Meredith last month, not long after she got the notice, when she was wondering what to do. Staying put, it turns out, wasn't possible.
Basically, my only option was to move out because there's no way that I could afford $1,700 a month in rent.
In recent weeks, even more extreme cases have emerged. In the trendiest parts of Toronto, some tenants in highly desired condominium units have been hit with rent increases of 50% or more.
The construction.
And so now the Ontario government is extending rent controls to cover newer buildings, which had been exempt, and capping all increases to a maximum of 2.5% annually.
This will strengthen protection for tenants against sudden and dramatic rent increases.
Tenants groups say the moves were necessary.
Landlords might be a little bit upset, but frankly, it's the strongest rental market in 30 years right now for them. They're doing fine. Tenants, on the other hand, are getting absolutely hammered.
Landlords are upset. Stan Cho owns several condominium units and rents them out. Rent controls, he argues, will kill construction and investment and eventually make the shortage of available rental units worse.
If our domestic investor stops investing because of this issue, which is very likely,
the whole house of cards could come crashing down.
And not just in Toronto. For while the horror stories of massive rent increases were clustered here, the new, stricter rent controls apply across Ontario.
Very disappointed. This will have a significant impact on new rental construction across the province and here in Toronto.
Ontario is promising to make $25 million a year available to offset development fees for projects, something it says will keep rental construction going. This economist says it's impossible to assess the risk that comes with the new rent control policy without more details of how and where those millions of dollars will be handed out.
Perhaps this will not be too impactful on the market, but it could be impactful. It could have dire consequences.
In the meantime, Nicole Meredith is moving out and moving on. Soon, she will be splitting her rent with someone else. Howard Gould, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, taking action on housing hikes can be politically advantageous, but by doing that, provinces are biting a hand that feeds them well. Take British Columbia. When it introduced that foreign buyers tax, sales slowed, yes. But that means a hit to property transfer taxes, which have filled the province's coffers in recent years. Last year alone, that tax brought in more than $2 billion, and this year, it's expecting hundreds of millions of dollars less. Allegations against another Canadian senator. Will tell you who and why straight ahead.
And the story of maple syrup is told on film. What better way to learn than by watching a movie on television?
This is one of the earliest methods used to process food in Canada. Our early settlers not only used to tap their own trees on their own farms, but they used to even plant them along the roadside. And you can still see many of those sugar maples along the roads here in many parts of Canada.
At Elmville, Ontario, Wally Greenlaw uses an ultramodern pipeline to bring the sap from the bush to the sugar shack.
It's a sealed system. It's on vacuum, so it's a sealed system. Nothing gets in but sap. I just love it up here in the bush, making syrup, and my father with me. And, we like making syrup. I guess that's the thing.
You know, most people have regarded maple syrup production as a nice hobby, nostalgic and all that, but rarely as a viable business. Well, that may not be the case much longer, because true maple syrup may be on the verge of making a comeback.
There's something that in pure maple syrup that you just can't duplicate any other way.
I know our sales are up. Every year they're going up, and if you've got a good quality product and market it in a proper way, you'll have no problem.
This is one of the largest maple syrup warehouses in the world. Last fall, 27 million pounds were stored here. The huge surplus forced down prices. The market took off, and the syrup went with it. A lot of it is bound for the United States, where the appetite for syrup is growing.
During a routine inventory check, someone noticed a lot of syrup had disappeared.
We were shocked. We didn't know what happened.
The warehouse that was robbed holds enough maple syrup to fill nearly 2 Olympic-sized pools. A lot of that was stolen, perhaps millions of dollars worth.
The syrup was insured, so producers won't be out any money, but there could be a sticky problem for buyers and processors. They may have to compete with a black market of liquid gold.
There is a human and poetic quality in maples, which is easily felt. Many farmers would no more part with their maple bush or orchard than with any precious heirloom.
The Calgary Flames and defenseman Dennis Wideman are being sued for more than $10 million after a linesman was injured last season. Wideman was suspended 10 games for this incident. After taking a hit, Wideman cross-checked linesman Don Henderson from behind. Henderson says he suffered a concussion and has lingering injuries. He hasn't returned to work. There's been no response from Wideman or the Flames. A number of federal departments are trying a new way of hiring. They're taking the names off of job applications. The pilot project will involve 6 of the biggest departments. The applicant's country of origin as well as email address will also be hidden from hiring managers during the initial screening process. The government says it's all part of its goal to promote gender and ethnic equality. It says it's testing the process before expanding it across the entire civil service. Another Canadian senator is at the centre of a potential controversy. CBC News has learned it involves Conservative Senator Daniel Lang and that an investigation was opened. Hannah Thibodeau has the details.
Yukon Conservative Senator Daniel Lang and his policy advisor were forced to fend off allegations of workplace harassment.
Senate officials privately described the complaints as bullying, belittling, screaming and hollering at parliamentary staff.
CBC News has learned an internal investigation was initiated by Senate officials earlier this year. A Senate spokesperson says the integrity of any complaint-based human resources process is dependent on confidentiality being maintained.
It's not the only workplace complaint against Lang and his policy advisor, Naresh Ragabir. An earlier case was dropped after the employee was transferred to another job on Parliament Hill.
Lang was appointed by Stephen Harper in 2009. Ragabir provided a statement quoting the senator. "I don't know where you heard this, but neither my office nor I are currently subject to any administrative review." Late this evening, Ragabir sent another email saying he himself did have a complaint against him in 2016, but he says an outside investigator found it, quote, utterly baseless. And then Senator Lang sent an email stating, "My office is not subject to a harassment probe by the Senate. Neither I nor anyone in my office is in breach of Senate policy related to workplace harassment or any other Senate policy." However, multiple sources across party lines say there have been complaints about Senator Lang's behavior.
The 2 men have been approved to receive more than $28,000 for legal counsel since Lang became a senator. The Senate confirms it gave Lang and a member of his office money for legal fees, but it won't say how much of that was allocated to deal with the 2 harassment cases. And this is just the latest headache for the Senate in the past few months.
With 2 other senators embroiled in controversy.
Senators we've spoken to admit the recent cases are derailing the efforts to improve the reputation of the Red Chamber. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Former Veterans Ombudsman Pat Stogren is running to lead the NDP.
I've embarked on this mission not as an opportunity to become a politician, but rather I am worried at the distinct lack of leadership that is manifest in the senior echelons in government.
Stogren is also a retired Canadian Armed Forces colonel. He joins 5 others vying for the job. The new leader will be chosen by the end of October. WestJet says it plans to launch a new ultra-low-cost airline this year. The new carrier doesn't have a name yet or any established routes, but we know it will cater to Canadians who want cheap flights with even fewer frills. WestJet still has some regulatory hoops to go through before it can launch a new airline. Even with today's shooting in Paris, France is set for a defining first round of presidential voting.
France doesn't know what it is, what it wants to become, and what it wants to do with itself and the world around it.
Nala Ayed looks below the surface of a population seething with discontent. But up next, Peter and the at-issue gang look beneath Donald Trump's anger at Canada. Let's check the day's business numbers. The TSX closed with a 72-point gain, while the Canadian dollar got a tiny boost. In New York, the Dow rose 174 points, and the Nasdaq hit a record high of 53 points.
The National with Knowlton Nash.
Good evening and welcome to rainy Vancouver and Expo 86.
The province they call supernatural is ready. They've been drilling, painting, cleaning, and checking all week.
I think everyone's relatively calm.
There's everything here, from the world's biggest flagpole to the world's biggest hockey stick and the world's biggest hockey puck. You never know what you'll see next, and you never know who you're going to meet next. There's the mascot of the fair, Expo Ernie.
Well, bless my little robotic heart. Noel Nash and a crew from the National. How do you do? Glad to have you here.
Expo is a fair about transportation, so this state-of-the-art monorail was a natural. For the first 2 months, it kept breaking down, but now it's carrying capacity crowds.
The sun shone for the first time in weeks in Vancouver today, and with the sun, Expo 86 came alive. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people got to see the fair for the first time. Being Saturday, it was a big day for the children. And for children, what counts at a fair is the fun. There was no shortage of that.
Just great. It's bringing the whole country together, too.
$5,000 is spent every night by Expo for a computerized laser and fireworks show. It's called International Nights of Fire.
We've never seen fireworks like that before.
Oh, that was awesome. At 86th Street, they party with the Powder Blues Band, and they obey the rules to eat, drink, and go crazy. When they first opened, these nightclubs had so many customers, things sometimes got out of hand. So extra doormen were hired. Proper dress is now required. The people who don't like dress codes still have a place to go, though. At the Irish pub, there doesn't seem to be any code at all.
Expo has done itself proud. That's great. They did well. I enjoyed myself like no other time.
It's the best thing that ever happened to British Columbia and to me.
I love it. I've had a great time here.
When we said in the House of Commons that was the most ridiculous policy ever, then if you will just wait, the truth will be given to you.
To unfurl a flag that is truly distinctive and truly national in character, as Canadian as the maple leaf on your badge.
When the cavalcade rolled up to a stage where Trudeau was to make remarks in support of the local candidates, he was confronted by sign-carrying hecklers again, this time protesting high unemployment. Trudeau's response, as it has been throughout this campaign, was to fight back.
Yeah, we saw you last night with your painted and hired signs and your hired friends. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of you holding signs like little boys. Come on, go and look for some jobs.
Oh, you're lost without your notes.
This lady just wouldn't give up and kept up a barrage of one-liners throughout the speech.
Are you running as a rhinoceros or as a liberal? Eh?
No rah-rah speeches. The truth.
Mulroney was frequently interrupted by a large and unusually provocative group of hecklers, most of them striking workers at the Gainers meatpacking plant in Edmonton. Mulroney appealed for calm, didn't get it, and didn't like it.
You can yell and you can scream all you want. I've fought bigger and better people than you, and I'll do it again.
As the Prime Minister continued toward his car, he came face to face with one of the demonstrators. Suddenly, Chrétien took the man by the back of the neck. His other hand was over the protester's mouth. He pushed him aside. Seconds later, another protester approached the Prime Minister. Chrétien knocked over the bullhorn that was in his hand.
But he was right in front of me, shouting and trying to block my way, so I took him out.
Well, let's start with the Trump-Canada story, as the U.S. president basically calls us a disgrace today. It's all over trade issues ranging from dairy products to lumber and timber. Some tweak. So let's talk. Chantel is here in Toronto. Maclean's political editor Paul Wells is in Ottawa. And joining us from Vancouver, Angus Reid Institute's executive director, Shachi Kurl. Let's start by actually reminding ourselves of what Donald Trump actually said today. Here's a short clip.
Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace. It's a disgrace. I spent time with some of the farmers in Wisconsin, and as you know, rules, regulations, different things have changed, and our farmers in Wisconsin and New York State are being put out of business, our dairy farmers. And that also includes what's happening along our northern border states with Canada, having to do with lumber and timber.
And he also talked a little bit about energy. So what does all this say from the guy who was saying just a little while ago, any changes are just minor tweaks? Now we're into much deeper rhetoric. Chantal?
That what Donald Trump says when he is next to you is probably valid until you step out of the room, and his priorities electorally or politically move on. That whoever is going to be negotiating these issues with Canada is going to be under pressure from the White House to wrestle major concessions, and that Justin Trudeau is going to be under pressure from his own voters to respond in kind at some point.
Paul, you saw Justin Trudeau today as he was talking about trade issues and the relationship with the States, but it was before that exchange that Donald Trump had.
Yeah, and Trudeau has been. This debate has been a few, or this discord has been a few days coming, and the response of the Trudeau government has been to have the ambassador David McNaughton send angry letters to the mayors of 2 border states, New York and another one. That's traditional. That's the way a rational government interacts with a rational set of governments, including state governments, in normal times, but that's not what we have here. It's clear that Donald Trump listens to the last person he talked to. Somehow he got out of his bubble and talked to some Midwestern dairy farmers, and now it's starting to look like Justin Trudeau is going to have to get on a plane and become the last person that Donald Trump spoke to again. He's going to have to go to the White House, and I would not be at all surprised if that happens within the next 3 or 4 weeks. To me, the most telling part in the clip you played is where the president says, rules, regulations, whatever have changed. That's the level of attention to detail that this guy has. He's not interested in arguments about the fact that American dairy farmers sell into our market for hundreds of millions of dollars more than we sell into theirs. That's not interesting to him. What's interesting to him is that Midwestern dairy farmers are complaining, and so Justin Trudeau, I think, is probably going to have to go and make the case in person again.
You know, Shachi, you look at data. I don't know whether you've ever asked these kind of questions, but do you think there's a sense among Canadians that they want Canada to up its, verbal exchange with the U.S. if hardball is the way that Donald Trump wants to play it?
Well, there is sort of an existential angst in this, because on one hand, yes, they do want to see Justin Trudeau throwing some flames of his own and upping the ante and taking a hard line to meet Donald Trump's hard line. But at the same time, they express a lot of concern and not a lot of confidence in Canada's ability and the Prime Minister's ability to really be effective in doing that, or to win that spitting match. And it has less to do in some cases with the abilities of the Prime Minister or of Justin Trudeau particularly, and more just to the fact that Donald Trump is a loose cannon. We know this. And so no matter what we do, it may be very hard to win.
Do we take from today that the game on this issue has changed, though? Or Chantal?
What we have to take from this week is that the strategy of being off the radar in the negative sense, not being mentioned, not being on the hit list, is so far failing, which is why, yes, I agree with Paul that Justin Trudeau may head to the White House again. And then when he leaves, what happens 3 weeks later when the president speaks to someone else is the big question. We are not dealing here with a professional president who is dealing with the issue in a professional way. All right,
I want to move to housing because it's been top of mind to a lot of people this week, governments, homeowners, and those who wish they could buy a home. Governments involving themselves, as we've seen this week in Ontario, 3 levels. We've seen it before in BC. Shachi, in general, how big an issue is housing when it comes to politics?
It's huge. I mean, in Metro Vancouver, it is the #1 issue, top of mind, particularly on the backs of and driven by the anxieties and discontent of young professional people in this region who can't access the real estate market. They can't even find a place to rent, and they're not underemployed. In the GTA, people are overwhelmingly inclined to say that housing prices and at the rate at which they're increasing is hurting the region, not benefiting benefiting it. So what this is doing is it's creating winners and losers. People who are already in the market, who have something at stake. They don't want to see their equity chipped away at by government interfering or trying to cool the market. And you've got those I don't like to call them losers, but people who are not in that winning column and are trying to get there, and they just can't right now.
What, you know, you've kind of touched on a couple areas, but Paul, give us a sense of what risks there are for governments when they start playing in the housing issue.
First of all, there is a risk in not addressing these issues, because suddenly they can go from not being salient, from not being something that people make their voting decisions based on, to suddenly mattering a lot. Remember, in the 2006 provincial election in New Brunswick, Bernard Lord was the premier there. He got laid low over energy prices, which had not been particularly a political issue until a few months before he lost power. That sure got noticed by a lot of people in Ottawa at the time. Similarly, the opposition party, the main opposition party in Ontario, led by Patrick Brown, the Conservatives, have been making a lot of hay over housing prices lately, and would have capitalized on it if the Wynne government in Ontario had done nothing about it. But the problem is, if you jump in and you implement some measures that seek to cool the housing market, then you own the issue. And if you're not successful, or if there are unintended consequences, as there almost always are when the government jumps into the market in a big way, then you own those consequences too.
Chantal?
Well, 2 points. The first is very difficult for the federal government to act in a meaningful way, in the sense that the federal governments do things for the entire country, and these are situations that are localized in BC and now Ontario. Problem for the federal government: whatever Ontario does might have a spillover effect on the real estate markets in Quebec, for instance, and so the problem starts getting bigger. Second point, yes, politically, provincial governments, especially those that are facing elections, have to act. I'm old enough to have covered an election in '75 where Bill Davis lost his majority over rent control. So when the rent control issue starts to spring up in Ontario and in the Ontario electorate, it can take down parties and governments in its wake.
I would just say that there is nothing more visceral for people, and I think Paul and Chantal have covered that. But, you know, when you're talking about where people sleep, where they eat, where they raise their kids and entertain their friends, this is so vital. And so, yes, the policy criticism may be around don't interfere, and in fact, it may not be effective. You know, a lot of people believe that there's not a lot that government can really do to change market forces, but the appearance of being tone deaf and disengaged on this issue could be political suicide. And so, you know, at some point you reach a tipping point where ignoring the issue or saying there's no story here, there's not much we can do, may be the right policy approach, but it's certainly not the political approach that politicians want to be taking.
All right, well, let me take part of that answer. Like, what can, and Paul, you start us, what can governments do to have an impact on the market?
Well, I think there is a relatively new element to the very hot housing markets in Ontario and in the BC, which is non-resident speculators, people from offshore who are buying and flipping land. And I do think it's appropriate for governments to take specific aim at that, which first the Christy Clark government in BC did, and now Kathleen Wynne's government has done in Ontario. A 15% tax on non-resident investment. But that's dangerous because in both provinces, in both Vancouver and in Toronto, the local economy depends a lot on people moving in from outside, both at low income levels and at high income levels. And you don't want to discourage that. So it's really hard to differentiate between someone who lives in Moscow or Beijing and is flipping for fun and profit versus someone who actually wants to come here and contribute to the economy. You begin to see the challenges in fine-tuning any policy approach.
And remember, this isn't just an issue for people who actually have houses, it's an issue for people who have kids who are looking for houses. So it's a societal issue, and that's why it's got legs. Now, you will notice that while the federal government is not doing a lot, and I don't think that they could or should, they are starting to keep track, or a closer track, of what is happening. As of this year, you have to report the sale of your home. Doesn't mean you're going to be paying income tax on it, but you didn't have to in the past report on your income tax that you'd sold the home over the previous year. So you can see that they're trying to get at least a handle as to who is buying what and doing what.
Shachi, I'll give you the last word here. You know, some people think we in Canada are naive, that we live in a world where cities the size of Toronto and the importance of Vancouver are paying much higher prices for their homes, whether they're houses or condos, than we are. And you know, and I'm sure that argument has played out somewhat in Vancouver over time. Does anyone buy that?
You know, a lot of that has to do with how housing prices and housing costs are tied to income. So in London, in Moscow, in Beijing, income levels in New York are very much based on, if you want to live in the city, employers have to be able to pay you to be able to live in the city. And there are enough corporate head offices, there's enough industry, there's enough business going on in order to support that. What we risk, particularly in Metro Vancouver, but it could go the same way in the GTA, is creating resort communities where if you can't pay workers enough to be able to live in the city and pay the premium to be in an area where they need to get to work on time, you're going to really just create ghost towns where very few who are able to afford it can be there, and everyone else is dealing with a very long, painful commute, and it becomes unsustainable over time, and employers are already telling us that.
All right, we're going to leave it at that. Good discussion. We thank you all. Shachi, good to have you back with us, and Paul, you too. Chantel here in Toronto tonight. Well, when we come back, politics of a different flavor. Nala Ayed sets the stage for Sunday's crucial first round in France's presidential election.
One of the highlights of the sports year throughout Western Europe, the International Auto Exhibit. By and large, the designers and manufacturers have worked toward the goal of producing a car that will carry the most people the farthest at the lowest cost. But comfort remains a factor. And as far as gadgetry is concerned, the European car makers are in a neck-and-neck race with their American counterparts.
Transporting cargo is no problem for the XP883.
The automobile may be a form of transportation, a way of getting from here to there, but it's also much more. It has served Americans as a status symbol, a love object, and an instrument of adolescent machismo. Suddenly we become aware that families that would never dream of purchasing a $100 painting are eager to spend $7,000 for a gleaming, striped and chromed hunk of metal. In their eyes, this suggests beauty.
This particular car is all electric, yes, and you remember we came in the front door here. It's very simple. There's a brake and an accelerator and one position for forward and one position for reverse, and that's all there is to it.
You just seal this up by pulling this down.
Right? Let's try it.
How about that? Do you suppose we'll ever get out again?
I don't know. I feel like preserved here like some peaches.
Now, we realize the emphasis is on wheels, but we never expected to find this. It's called the Panther 6 because it has 6 wheels, 2 on the back, 4 on the front. The Panther is now handmade just outside Vancouver and uses a huge Cadillac turbo engine.
How fast?
200 miles an hour.
How much?
$200,000.
Wow.
So what will you be driving in 25 years? This prototype was designed to travel at 240 kilometers per hour. TV cameras mounted inside the back of the car feed the driver pictures of what's happening behind.
What you do is you program in where you want to go and where you are, and on this screen you'll get a digitized map that shows you the best alternative route to take.
This car just might take the place of some airplane flights.
As we noted earlier, voters in France head to the ballot box on Sunday to choose a new president. Opinion polls suggest the election is too close to call, and it will almost certainly need a runoff next month to decide the winner. But one thing's sure, the stakes are high, and with the outcome having an impact well beyond the borders of the European Union's second largest economy. Nala Ayed is back, spotlighting France's political crossroads.
Of all the faces among France's agitators, these may be some of the most famous. And it doesn't take much to work out what message this sends about the politicians.
When you show Pinocchio, you know that he's lying.
For Combo, as he likes to be known, street art is like a coup on a wall, giving voice to people who are so done with traditional politics.
They have something happening because people want to have something to change, really want it.
France is in a disruptive mood. It's written all over the political street.
Populists left and right, outliers and upstarts are all among the frontrunners. And because they're favored by the voters, one could very well become the next French president.
Even in small cities, in the clamor for change, the insurgents draw enormous crowds. Many of them young, captivated by ideas once left to the margins. They come, they listen, and they approve. Resistance, they chant. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, so far left, his critics on the right call him the French Chavez. His surge terrifies the markets. He says it's a people's revolution. His France would be closer to Russia, out of NATO and into tax policies seemingly inspired by Robin Hood.
Je suis le candidat qui veut abolir la monarchie présidentielle et instaurer la 6e République.
That message delivered in multiple locations via hologram. Supporters on the streets still use the old methods to tap into the new discontent. Yann Brossat is an old political hand.
Bonjour.
Now candidate for Mélenchon, because he says the old left and the right have equally sold the voters out.
Je pense qu'il y a une forme de colère un peu froide depuis maintenant plusieurs années de la part des Français qui ont l'impression d'avoir voté et d'avoir été trahis. Et donc, il y a évidemment un succès pour les partis qui n'ont pas gouverné, ce qui est relativement logique.
Logical, maybe. But at this Sunday Paris market, there are more militants, as they call them here, than shoppers. How to choose from a gauntlet of activists selling their version of change. The only certainty ahead of that choice is that the French are tired of the old top-down political system. It's broken, says Claude Askolovitch, author and political translator.
The system is not dead. We feel it should die. We don't know how to replace it, because replacing it would be admitting that our old pyramidal structure, our old French way of seeing things, that some king, some General de Gaulle, some Louis XIV, some Napoleon, some Mélenchon will save us, is not working anymore.
But would-be kings have emerged all the same, casting themselves as the answer. 39-year-old Emmanuel Macron started the independent, centrist, pro-EU En Marche movement just a year ago. Though a former minister and a financier of the Paris elite, he claims to speak for Middle France.
Bonjour madame, je peux vous donner le programme d'Emmanuel Macron?
Amélie Crucifix is a doer. She's in advertising and recently took on a similar but more urgent role for En Marche. And she finds comfort in the middle ground the movement offers.
There's a lot of good ideas in the right and in the left, but there's too many years that we opposite the right and the left. It's not a good idea.
But it was a sharper sentiment that got her involved.
Fear, like what it did in politics with Trump, Fear from Brexit too. It's a big fear. I really think that Europe is important and I want to stay in Europe. I have to do something. I've got children and I really, really have to do something right now.
Even in a country that relishes debate, the differences this time are particularly sharp. Miles away on the political spectrum, 20-year-old Eve Projet, like a significant number her age, is opting for a more radical choice. Vote and yes, even run for far-right, anti-EU Front National.
On a une Europe supranationale qui décide pour les pays, ce qui est totalement scandaleux. Chaque État doit être souverain et pouvoir décider pour lui.
Marine Le Pen's nationalist project is built on the idea of France First, an anti-immigration, anti-Islam populist.
Le seul espoir qu'on retrouve aujourd'hui, c'est Marine Le Pen qui, elle, redonnera sa grandeur à la France.
It isn't clear whether all this is about who is best at selling hope or best at selling fear. In the dying days of the campaign, it was do or die. So the self-styled anti-establishment candidates descend on Paris to make a final plea. Some streets in Paris are edgy. Anti-Le Pen protests and a suspected arson attack on her headquarters have set a serrated tone.
Repulsive, laid, ugly. Yeah, it's an ugly campaign. France doesn't know what it is, what it wants to become, and what it wants to do with itself and the world around it. So it brings us bad politics.
Eve Projet says she doesn't understand why Le Pen might provoke fear in others. She's on her way to help set up for the party's pivotal Paris rally. She levels her own labels at Le Pen's main rival, Macron.
Cet homme représente vraiment un trou noir, c'est le vide. C'est vraiment le vide.
Across the city, Macron's supporters have booked a venue that holds 20,000. Soon, it takes on the feel of a giant nightclub. Amélie Crucifix is here too, doing her part to help persuade.
Nous allons rendre la France à son optimisme, à sa foi dans l'avenir.
But the critics are never far away.
Do we try this guy, Macron? Do we still try a new guy? Do we still admit that maybe we're not going to be, I don't know, cheated at? Is he for real? It has become the key question.
Hours later, Eve Projet takes her seat and Marine Le Pen takes the stage. Her motto, surprise, is in the name of the people.
Rendez-nous la France!
Just like many a moment in this election campaign, this too brought a surprise when a protester somehow made it onto the stage. Outside, anti-Le Pen protesters clashed with police again. Warnings come like sirens. Voters are told the road to change is rough, even dangerous and unpredictable. And yet, every one of the so-called agitators was, or still is, part of the establishment. They now stand for change in the name of the people who demand it. But if the polls are right, what to make of the countless who haven't decided at all? Nala Ayed, CBC News, Paris.
In a moment, we'll switch gears with some transportation innovation. That's next on The National.
I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Tomorrow on The Current, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Robert Schenken wrote Building the Wall in a white fury of anger over the Trump rhetoric in the U.S. presidential campaign. That story on The Current, weekdays at 8:30 on CBC Radio 1.
Tomorrow, Coca-Cola Company will tell a thirsty world it's putting a smoother, sweeter taste into the most instantly recognizable bottle in the world.
This has got to be the boldest consumer products move of any kind, of any stripe, since Eve started to hand out apples.
Here they drag out all the hoopla, thinking that they're going to war against the arch-rival Pepsi. But it turns out they've picked a fight in their own backyard with their best friends.
I can't tell the difference between the new taste of Coke and the old taste of Pepsi.
Why are you upset about it?
My oldest daughter is 22. Her first word was Coke. Her second word was Mommy.
For decades, Coke has stayed on top by being cautious and conservative. Lately, though, Pepsi is growing faster than Coke. The Pepsi challenge is clearly hurting.
We made our choice, making it Pepsi.
Pepsi has captured a young, hip positioning that Coke, by nature of its corporate culture, is not really able to understand yet.
I put a Pepsi in the motion, but that choice is up to you. Hey.
It must be every young boy's fantasy to turn around and see Michael Jackson. I mean, how wonderful.
The Coca-Cola Company is bringing back the real thing. For weeks, the company has been hyping the taste of its new formula Coke. But today it announced it's going to start selling the old Coke again under a new name.
We're bringing it back. The original taste of Coca-Cola returns as Coca-Cola Classic.
We have booster ignition and liftoff.
When the shuttle Challenger blasts off tomorrow, it will begin a new space race. On board will be two specially designed soft drink cans, one from Coke, the other from Pepsi, allowing astronauts to drink a carbonated beverage in the weightlessness of space for the first time.
Yeah, it's the Cola Wars in action.
The supermarket shelf is the front line in the cola war. Pepsi and Coke slugging it out in the world's longest-running business battle. The National.
The National.
Tonight.
So you have an airplane that takes off vertically like a helicopter.
Cool. But where this tiny jet really hopes to take off is a kind of Uber of the skies. German-based Lilium Aviation showed off test flight video of its all-electric two-seater prototype. The eventual goal is to be a flying taxi. Innovation in transport doesn't need an engine, though. This week, tire maker Bridgestone revealed it will soon make errorless tires for bicycles. They work using plastic resin spokes that flex to the weight of a rider. No risk, then, of punctures or flats. That is The National for this Thursday night. For news at any hour, you can always go to our website, cbcnews.ca. I'm Susan Ormiston. Thanks so much for watching.